Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Doing Well. And on this week's episode, we are talking about something quite interesting to me personally, because I'm intrigued about the concept of boredom. Today, we're talking about from boredom to brilliance, how to harness creative energy. And I don't know about you, but it's a new year when we're recording this episode, and I am trying to find new ways to find my creative outlets. So I'm very excited to talk to our guest today, Mark, about this topic. Mark A. Hawkins, Ph.D. is an author, educator, and clinical counselor. He has been interviewed by the New York Times, the Daily Telegraph, and several other news stations and podcasts for his ideas. His research focuses on interdisciplinary understandings of meaning and purpose as they relate to human well-being. Mark was published in the Journal of Humanistic Psychology and is the author of The Power of Boredom, Why Boredom is Essential for Creating a Meaningful Life, and The Mismatched Human, Our Fight for a Meaningful Existence. Mark likes to try out new recipes, research new topics, and go hiking. Thanks so much for joining our show, Mark.
Thanks. Great to be on here, Lou.
Yeah, well, great bio. I have to say, you've been doing so many different things. It's my first time, being able to talk to you about these things, and you probably have been interviewed about this topic so many times. And so that leads me to my question: how did you get here in your career, and why did you choose this line of work?
Well, you know what? I'm going to say I've always been interested in like the human condition. Like, why are we here? How can we live a life that's, successful, like peaceful? How can we just live our best lives? And, that led me into studying psychology, philosophy, history. And I think I'm just always kind of looking for answers. And I like to apply what I've learned to try to help people, to try to write books and, and use that in my counseling practice. And the journey continues.
Yeah, and there's so many different topics that you're exploring as well, and I'm sure you'll probably expand to even other areas of work that you might find interesting. Maybe part of your creative outlet, as we're going to talk about today. So before we get into the episode and talk about boredom, about brilliance, about creative energies, let's talk about you. Let's get to know Mark a little bit better. We have this section we called "Have You Met Mark?" Got a few things we would like to know about you. So first thing first, I know you're an author yourself, but I would love to know which book is your favorite.
Yeah, that's a hard one. There's so many good books out there that have taught me so much. But I would say that the book that has most influenced me, and I think that is just, I feel like everyone should read, is called The Passion of the Western Mind by Richard Tarnas. It's sort of a narrative history of Western philosophy, but it does it in such an accessible way where it interweaves, the history of the ideas and how they all influence each other, what's going on at the time in history, all the way up to today. And it really helped me understand our world and myself and what was going on. And it led me to so many other ideas I wanted to explore. And I think it's just so accessible and well written that I can read it over and over again. And every time I read it, I get something new. So definitely that one.
Yeah, sounds like you've read it a few times at least, so that's nice. And what about a movie? Which one would be your favorite?
Yeah, like I was thinking about this, and I don't know if this is how recent this one is, but I keep on going back to the movie Prometheus, and I don't know if you know that one, but it's a science fiction one. It's actually the aliens' origin story.
Right.
It's a hardcore science fiction and movie, and those are the types of movies that I usually watch. And I know there's something about that one. It's like the origin of the species. It's the origin of, how that whole human alien conflict came to be. So yeah, it's yeah. And anything science
Interesting.
fiction.
Yeah. Sci-fi
Mm-hmm.
is always fun. I was quickly Googling it, and it came out in 2012.
Right.
Not that long ago, but also, yeah, that looks very interesting. And now that I look at it, I'm like, have I seen this movie? Maybe I
It's a good
have.
one. You should try it.
Yeah. You know what? If even if I have, I might just forget because I have really bad memory. So I was
Okay.
putting on my list to watch it again because I love sci-fi. Thank you for the recommendation. Next question is about podcasts. Now, you've been on many podcasts, and some of our guests actually don't listen to podcasts. I wonder if you do, though. And if yes,
Yeah.
what is your favorite one?
I don't listen to that many, but I do listen to a couple. I was recently turned on to one by my coworker called Philosophize This. And it basically is a person who is every week or every couple of weeks, they go through a philosophical idea and how it applies to the world today. And of course, for me, that's great because I love new ideas. I love hearing ideas spoken in like sort of a really accessible way. And so it saves me from reading, going off and trying to read a lot of these philosophical books that are maybe not so accessible.
Mm.
And so on this podcast, this person has clearly done their research and they sort of bring it down to a very accessible level and then asks the question, how can we apply this to our daily life to make our lives better?
Hmm.
I also listen to some health podcasts as well, just, for physical health, because that's a great part of well-being as well.
Yeah, that sounds fun. Especially the first recommendation about the one with was it called Philosophize This?
Philosophize This. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. And I think it's kind of an area where it's going to be really hard to follow. Like I myself find all these, different areas of philosophy is really hard to follow. So if there's a podcast about that, I would love to check that out as well. Probably same thing
Mm-hmm.
for our audience. Thank you for sharing that. And next question is about a role model. Now, a lot of us have one or many role models that we look up to. So I wonder if you have one or maybe a few, and if so, who are they?
Well, I was thinking about this, and I can't think of a specific person that sort of embodies everything, but I can say people I admire and people who I look up to are people who can just sort of have courage and jump into things without a lot of anxiety and stress. I feel like I'm a person who over prepares for things, who, will read and research about things before I do it. And so those people who are able to just jump in and go and learn through experience, like that's something I admire. And when I see somebody doing that, I was like, I asked them, wow, how do you do that? How do you just jump in without thinking? That's the
Mm,
way it looks like to me.
mm,
Right. So those
yeah.
types of people.
Definitely. That sounds
Mm-hmm.
great. I think it's the same for a lot of us, right? Because I think not one particular person or multiple people. I think I learned a lot from even friends, the friends who can just go
Mm-hmm.
straight ahead with something and that they just barely knew about and then started something that's completely different from what they knew in their career or even in life. And I feel like that's really admirable. So totally agree with you there. And finally, in this section, we would love to know about, the inspiration you get, because obviously to be able to do what you're doing now, I'm sure you've learned quite a few things, taken a few courses. So which course would you say to be the most outstanding that has influenced you to this day?
Wow, that's kind of like the books question, right? So many good courses over the years. But I'd have to say, so as a counselor, we have to do continuing education every year, a certain amount of credits. And some courses that I have recently taken are on narrative therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, these are things I've studied before, but every time I take a new course, I find I learn new techniques and new sort of ways of approaching problems. And I get excited about that and I get inspired with that. And, I'll be taking the course and I'll hear a new concept and I will say, oh, wow, oh, I can apply this to this person's problem or to this part of my life. Oh, and this will, come together with this idea really well. And so it gets my creative juices going when I start taking those types of courses.
Very cool. Well, thank you for
Mm-hmm.
that. And definitely really related to your line of work. So, we're in good hands today talking about today's topic, especially because you mentioned well-being quite a bit. And today we're here to be talking about well-being. Obviously, an aspect of that is, the power of boredom.
Mhm.
But let's start with well-being because, that's probably your specialty and that's what we're here for. So how would you view well-being? You probably have a personal definition and you also have lots of understanding from the courses you've taken over the years. So I would love to hear your perspective on this concept.
Yeah, I mean, I think well-being for me is it's a shifting concept, right? The more I learn, the more it changes. But I think at the moment, I think being able to go through life with a tranquil mind, without having too much, even though we go through stresses, even though we have, work and all sorts of things happening in the world, being able to approach everything with sort of a tranquil mind, not too much anxiety, not too much sadness about it, and just being able to go and do things with courage all the time. I think that's part of well-being. I also think having a meaning and purpose is definitely part of well-being, rather than just going through and accumulating things, going for money, going for achievement, all these different things, but actually doing things for a purpose and having that a strong purpose always in your mind. Um, and also part of well-being would be the physical aspect as well. I'm a big believer that your physical health has a huge impact on mental health and everything in your life. But I think the biggest part is the tranquil mind.
Yeah, I like that, the
Mm-hmm.
tranquil mind. I think it's so hard to achieve, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's probably something that's extremely challenging to get in this day and age because you have so much stimulation and everyone is sort of under this pressure to be better, to do better, and to sort of achieve so many things at the same time. I don't know about our audience, but for me, this is something that I struggle with myself personally because when you mentioned it's not about achieving more, like doing more and getting more. It's actually something that I've been struggling with for years. Sometimes I notice that if I'm not doing things with a certain purpose in mind, like you were saying, it's so important to have a purpose. I tend to just hoard experiences and hoard things, if that make any sense. Like I would
Mm-hmm.
just go and, I remember, I think last year, everyone was like, Lou, I see you like go to all these gigs. Like, why did you get the time to do all of this? I'm just like, well, that's just what I do. Cause, part of that was like, oh, I'm seeking my purpose. I haven't found it yet. And I felt like it all seems like a blur. And I just wanted to maybe have a getaway by, listening to live music, going to all these things. And to me at that time, it felt like this is my purpose, to enjoy all these things while I'm alive. But at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, the big questions remain like, what is my purpose in life? That's really hard to find. I'm still figuring it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the big things that I've been, big in researching too is how do we do that, right? How do we actually find a sustainable purpose in our world today? It's pretty hard, and like I think that we can have purposes for some periods of our lives and it shifts, right? And then it's different, it shifts throughout our lives. And I think it can also be actually really stressful when people tell you, oh, you need to find your purpose, right? Well, maybe you don't have one purpose, right?
Yeah.
And so that becomes a really stressful thing, thinking you have to find this one thing that you're meant to do on this planet, right? I don't believe that's true. I think we have so many
Yeah.
things we could do,
Yeah.
right? But it's about finding the one that I guess feels natural at the moment.
That's so true. And, from what you just said, I actually took a few lessons from that because this beginning of the year, I'd done a lot of reflection for the past year, especially the past few years. And I think it's not that probably not that sad if you're like, oh, I actually don't know what my purpose is. Because a lot of the time people kind of like, oh, yeah, like I'm living with this purpose. This is what I'm meant to do. Some people are really good at figuring out, what they want to do at that particular period in time and they have a clear purpose. Some people are probably like me, they're figuring things out. And a big part of that in our well-being is feeling bad about the fact that we don't know. And I think that that's actually wrong. It's okay to not know because
Mm-hmm.
in the journey you figure out new things. For example, in this span of the past few years where I feel like, oh, I thought I knew what I was supposed to do, and then I was like, oh, I actually don't know anymore. But then new purposes emerge, And, I'm in the process of figuring those things out, and it helps my well-being to be okay with not knowing. And,
Hmm.
you mentioned the physical health aspect of it, and I feel like that's so important. And what I realized in the past, I probably would say 10, 12 months is, just going to the gym every day and working on my physical health is already contributing so much to my well-being. It's not like, oh, I have to, go to work every day knowing exactly what I'm doing in my career, in my life. I might not know everything, but I feel balanced. And that's kind of like, similar to your definition of well-being. And I guess that helps our audience in some ways, because I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions people have. Like, you have to have everything figured out to have great well-being, but it's actually not.
Yeah, I don't think any of us have everything figured out, right?
Yeah, I agree. None of us does. So to me, that's one of the biggest misconceptions about well-being that I myself have realized recently. I wonder if you have noticed any other misconceptions that people have when it comes to well-being.
Well, I think definitely, the mainstream culture and all the advertising out there that affects us is really telling us that, accumulation of money, accumulation of, achievement, like we were talking about, is going to make you happy. And also, like, you compare, always trying to get the next thing, right? I think that is what we're sold as being happiness and well-being. But of course, if that becomes sort of like a corrosive desire, like something that you have to get in order to be happy, then that becomes very toxic. Um, Nowadays, I'm kind of big into Epicurean philosophy, and Epicurus basically says that, well, desires for more money, more status, more security, those things are fine to a certain point, right? But as soon as that becomes your whole life, then it's negative returns. So even if you're not satisfied with $1 million, you need 2 million, then 4 million, and all that striver's curse, right? Like, that's what makes us unhappy, but yet that's what we're taught in the media is going to make us happy. So it's
Yeah.
about how much is enough.
Mm. Yeah, so true. I mean, yeah, I just remember this song in my head. Anyway, I think the tagline here probably be enough is enough. Whatever you think is enough, I guess.
Yeah.
And it really helps to find our balance in our well-being, because so one of our colleagues the other day was asking this question, like, team, what is your one word or two words to describe the year? And to me, I'm very big on balance. It's so hard to find, and that's quite similar to what you're saying, because we'll never have enough if we keep wanting more. If even when we have more, we'll start wanting more than that. So
Mm-hmm.
it's never going to end. So in this journey of working on our well-being, obviously one of the aspects that we're here to talk about today is the power of boredom, being creative and finding creative outlets. Thanks to that, you wrote a whole book on it, Mark. So I would love to hear from you. How would you define boredom? And also, how can that act as a catalyst for our creative outlets?
Right. So boredom, I guess you could define it as a state when you cannot find anything you want to do, that you have to do, or that you feel like doing. So it's just sort of I call it an empty space in, like, your life. I think with us today, with our constant need for doing activity, most of us, we start feeling that bit of restlessness or boredom, and we're going to fill it up right away with chores or answering work emails or something else, right? But it's that empty space, and of when we just don't feel like doing anything, we don't want to do anything, we can't have anything to do, right? And that's very uncomfortable, but that's what boredom is.
Yeah, definitely. I think I saw a video on YouTube last year. I don't remember who created the video, but I think this person was also sort of leaning towards the same concept, and they were talking
Mm-hmm.
about why boredom is essential. Like, exactly like what you're saying. Fine, in the space of not knowing what to do, not even
Mm-hmm.
knowing what you like anymore, you can discover new hobbies, new interests, and when it comes to our creativity, a lot of people claim I'm not creative, because they're like, oh yeah, I'm just not a creative person, especially for office workers, right? Like, they're like, oh yeah, like I have a 9 to 5, that's what I do. Don't really, like, I'm not a creative person. And there have been a few podcasts on our shows where we talk about the fact that everyone is creative in their own ways, and because in this topic, we're talking about how boredom can actually nurture our creativity.
Mhm.
How does that relationship actually work, in terms of turning our boredom into creativity?
Right. Well, the way I like to think about it is if you actually allow the space and you don't fill up that space of boredom, then your mind is going to rush to fill it up with ideas. So I think, like, if you look at it evolutionarily, we are meant to keep moving. Our minds are meant to keep moving, and for the sake of survival. But today, the problem is that we have become so overstimulated, constantly doing things, constantly, bombarded with all sorts of media, that we've gone way too far in terms of activity, compulsive activity, right? So our minds need that space, right? So by giving them boredom, we're actually giving it space to fill up with things that aren't in the external world, but instead fill up with things that are our mind. And so, I mean, I can just give an example of my own experience. Sometimes when I'm trying to come up with an idea for something, I will just actually sit for an hour or so and just sit on the couch and be really uncomfortable, right? It'll be really uncomfortable for the first little while. I'll want to get up. I'll want to go to the kitchen and do something. I'll think to myself, oh, I should go do this chore, right? But I stop that. And what happens is our minds become so desperate to do something, to be activated, that they start coming up with ideas, right? They start filling your mind to try to get your creative juices going. Now, I don't know if that's scientific, but this is my experience of it, right? And I've done this over and over again with different projects I'm doing, and it always seems to give me some sort of, new way of looking at something, right? Because I'm not distracted by other external activities going on.
Yeah, that's actually really hard to do, like just sit there being uncomfortable. Because I think, like you're saying, when we start to feel uncomfortable not doing anything, we'll start to want to distract ourselves by doing other things. And I think, I'm not sure if this is the same thing for a lot of people, but I have found that if I just immediately turn my attention to something else, I'm like, okay, I'm so bored, I cannot stand this. Let me just like browse books. Like sometimes I do that, just like browse for books to read. Um, I could have actually spent that time working on some ideas, like exactly what you were trying to do. But it's extremely challenging because you're just in that space where you just want to like get out of that straight away. It's just a human
Mm-hmm.
thing, right? You don't want to feel uncomfortable. And it sounds to me like in this concept of boredom, it's actually good for you to try and sit through that uncomfortability for a while, so that you can actually write through it and then come up with new ideas. And it seems like there's a certain relationship between boredom and well-being, because once we have gone through that and we have come up with new ideas for our creative outlets, then we act on it and then we actually feel better, and that nurtures our well-being. So that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
my theory there. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think boredom, if you look at boredom and well-being, I think there's several things that it does. Definitely one is creativity, and I think creativity is a huge part of well-being. Another part is the more we are able to, I'm going to say, do low engagement activities like boredom, then just the more fulfilling our lives will be, right? So I think these days we have so much, media out there that our minds get very overstimulated, and therefore, like, things get very, like, I'm going to say mundane for us. Like, if you look at Netflix or any of these sort of streaming services, there's literally hundreds, perhaps thousands of shows, right? But when I'm flipping through them, I'm like, oh, there's nothing on, right? Because there's so much excitement and stuff out there already, and we're in such a state in our society that there's so much content out there that we are not used to, having, like, I guess if I were to think of it this way, in the 1980s, when we had 13 channels, right? If that 1980s person could come to today and look at our Netflix, they would be like, this is endless. This is endless, like, entertainment,
Yeah.
right? And so I guess we have a low tolerance for things. And the more we bring boredom into our life, our tolerance for boredom will go, up. And so the activities that we usually maybe find boring will now become more interesting, right? So there's that way. I think it'll make other activities that we normally find boring to be interesting. I think another main part of boredom is that it's very therapeutic if we can use it properly. And that is sort of one of the main focuses I have in the power of boredom, is that if we can learn to really harness it, it can help us to learn a lot about ourselves. When you're sitting there bored and you're restless, quite oftentimes a lot of negative thoughts will come up. And if we're able to realize that and not sort of react to it right away, then we can start unpacking those thoughts and actually use that as a space for therapeutic interventions and all sorts of things like that.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, because as I said, it's just so hard nowadays to actually sit with boredom. You know, you have so much going on around you that it's so easy to distract yourself. Plus, you want to distract yourself in the first place. So I guess the question is not, how good is boredom, but actually how can we utilize it? Because as you mentioned earlier, the first part of sitting with it is so uncomfortable. And another thing that I've realized when you start talking about Netflix is that I actually have found myself overwhelmed. So I don't know how people are dealing with this, but I'm overwhelmed at how much we have going on around us, how many resources are available, that I cannot even choose a show to watch. Like I think I haven't watched anything new in about a year. Like, and over the holiday, I was like, okay, I should watch something new. I haven't watched anything new. I've just been rewatching The Big Bang Theory for like 20 times. That's not good. Like, let's watch something new. And I found it to be so hard, and finally I picked something because I finally had some time. So I think the question here is, our lives are constantly busy. We're all busy. Let's be real. But it's also a matter of how do we pick and choose and, structure our day in a way where we can actually utilize that boredom. Because a lot of the times, some people might be really great at, you know what, I want to watch this and I'm just going to do that straight after work. Like my housemate, she's really good at it. Whenever she's done with work, like she has a new show going on already. And I'm just paralyzed. I don't even know what to watch. And I'm not saying that this is a conversation about Netflix, but it's about, boredom, right? We want to get to that stage where we can actually utilize this boredom to do something. But I feel myself overwhelmed. I cannot even watch something, let alone do activities. And I noticed that, there are things that I used to really like doing, like doing calligraphy. That was fun. And then now, even when I'm bored, I just zone out sometimes. It's actually quite hard to get back into that. So for our audience members who might be maybe struggling to, get back into things or creativity or creative activities that they used to enjoy, like myself, and B, they might not know what to do, even if they have tried different things because they're so overwhelmed with stimulations. What would be some of the ways that we can utilize boredom, and actually make it happen?
Well, I mean, I think the first step is to get used to boredom. And what I usually do is when I come home from work, I have the tendency, I'm going to scroll on my phone or I'm going to, watch YouTube or something like that. But I like to try to just actually sit for maybe 5, even 10 minutes, just doing nothing. Because I know I'm going to have the tendency to just go to something super high engagement right away. And that's going to just set my evening off on a, path of, watching endless Netflix. But so I like to take that time, 5, 10 minutes, get over that first minute or two of discomfort and just sit there. And, sometimes that'll give me ideas. Sometimes what's come to me throughout the day or like something that's happened to me throughout the day, I'll have a new understanding of it. It gives us time to process what's going on. And it gets our mind that free space. So that's how I would start with boredom. And I think that if we're going to use boredom for a creative space or to try to get inspiration, one thing that I've done in the past is I'll have a topic that I want to start researching about or want to get start a project about, and I will read as much as I can about that topic, maybe for like an hour or two. And then right after that, I will just sit there on the couch or wherever and sit there, and there will be a period of boredom where I'll want to go back and read again, or well, I want to go and do something else. But I just sit there for an hour and let my mind and the universe do its thing. And all of a sudden, all these new ideas start coming up that are related to the thing that I was reading about, or the thing that I was, looking at creating for the project. And so I just sit there with a pen and start writing all these ideas down. And so that's how we do it when I sort of have a block, right? When I don't know what to write about. That's one method I use.
Yeah, that is a good way to go about it, especially for people that are so used to having stimulations around them all the time. Like, because I know a lot of people are like that. Just immediately as they're done with one activity, they move on to the next, and there's no space. There's no space for boredom. They're probably just, going with the flow and doing exactly what they're used to. And nurturing this is important because I know that creativity is such a big part of our well-being. And, as I said earlier, a lot of people thought that they are not creative, but they are. And, engaging in activities that would nurture our creativity would be important. So what do you think to be the relationship between creativity and well-being?
Well, I think each of us, like you were saying, has creativity inside us. And for each of us, that's different. What we have that sort of need to do or need to create is different. But I think it has something to do with our souls deep down, is that we are naturally creative and it needs to come out. For me, it's researching and coming up with these ideas that are, about the human condition. It's writing. And for somebody else, it would be something else. But it gives us a purpose. It gives us a direction. It gives us something that's not necessarily related to, money or pleasure. Now, I'm not saying that some of these, sometimes our creative outlets don't make money, but I think that the most successful ones are ones we do for themselves, right? I think that even if I never made any money from books or anything like that, I would still be getting excited when I read this idea and thinking, oh, how can I apply this to my life? How can I, use this to help this person or that person? And so I would still get excited by those things. And so I think creativity aligns with our meaning and purpose a lot of the time for most of us, right? But it's about, you got to find what do you naturally actually want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important because most of the time it's just, I don't know what I like, right? Just right back to the story I was telling you earlier about myself. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I want to get back into old, creative outlets. But then other times I'm like, I want to try something new, but I just don't know what that new thing is. And it's, that is probably because I've been packing simulations into my days and I just don't have any space for boredom and to actually think about what else do I like to do? Like maybe something new will come out of it. So I'll definitely try that after today. It's so important. Now, I know that you wrote a whole book on this, probably in that you touch on creativity too. And so I would love to hear, what else about boredom that people probably don't know about, maybe some interesting things that came out of your book when you did your research, and especially anything on creativity and our mental health that you would like to mention.
Yeah. So I think that the link between creativity, mental health, and boredom, I mean, they all go together. I think we need to have boredom for creativity and we need to have creativity for mental health. And I think, like I was saying before, I think boredom helps us to tap into our creative energies. And when we are tapping into our innate creative energies, we are naturally going to be, better with our well-being and our mental health. And I think it also goes down to, if we are truly doing what we want to create, that inevitably is going to help other people, which is another important aspect of creativity and well-being. With my, passion for exploring these ideas and, using therapeutic ideas and tying them together with philosophical ideas, I think that helps the people who I'm working with, right? And so it's this big circle of, helping others, experiencing boredom, creating what I have to offer the world and putting it out there, and getting that positive feedback and just feeling like, you know what, like I'm doing something good here. I'm doing something that people will appreciate and that's going to help them live a better life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes we don't realize how much little things mean to others. We think that, oh, yeah, I'm just doing this for myself. And it means so much to us, to ourselves. But at the same time, it means something to others too. I remember, looking at my housemate's paintings. So she's really good at paintings and she really loves doing that in her free time. And I was like, I didn't know that you could be this creative, And she's like, yeah, I like doing these things. And then there was a few weeks where her mental health was really down, and she had a bit of free time on her hand, and she was saying to me, I'm feeling really restless. I don't have
Mm,
anything to do. And I realized that she stopped painting. So I actually just suggested, why don't you try painting again? Pick up painting. Why don't you do that? And then in the process of doing that, she was like, this is fun. Maybe I should do this and sell them on Etsy.
mm,
And I was like, oh, yeah, that's so great, because you're so bored, you don't have much to do right now, and you kind of feel like you have free time, and that can be an additional source of income. That sounds great to me. And then a friend of mine saw like a photo that I took of my housemate's paintings, and they were saying, wow, these are brilliant, where did they come from? And like, my housemate made them. And they're like, yeah, I would love to buy one of her paintings one day. And there you go. It's kind of like, it helps people because they didn't know about this person. And then, one thing led to another. Someone's creativity out of boredom becomes somebody else's a source of joy. And just exactly what you're saying, it doesn't just help our own mental health and well-being, but it helps other people too. So I think that's kind of like the beauty of it. We probably don't realize it ourselves, and it's just so hard to see things ourselves, right? Sometimes other people have to
mhm.
tell us, or when things finally come together, that's when we realize, oh, that makes a lot of sense. My boredom helped.
Yeah, you never know what's in. That's my experience. You never know what's going to help someone. I've had experiences where I think like I've helped someone a lot, and it turns out I haven't. And then sometimes when, I think, oh, that is definitely not helpful. And then the person says, that was the most helpful thing I've heard in a while. And so,
Mm.
you just kind of never know. And you just got to kind of put yourself out there creatively and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as I mentioned earlier, because you have a whole book on this topic, is there anything else that we haven't covered in today's conversation that you would like to share with our audience?
I think, I think the main thing is that boredom is like a neutral state. And I think it's what we do with it that is either positive or negative. And so I think really sitting down and learning as much as possible about our reactions to boredom is the most important thing we can do. So, some people have the tendency to, as soon as they're restless, they get up and they go to the kitchen to eat something, right? Or some people will, they'll go to their work email and they'll start doing work. And of course, that leads to stress and all sorts of things. Going to the kitchen might lead to, weight gain, you know. So I think learning your reactions to boredom is the single most important thing you can do. And definitely don't avoid it, right? Sit with it, learn to be with it at least a couple minutes a day, especially after I think you've been to work or you've been to a stimulating environment. Take that time, 5-10 minutes to just sit there, decompress, don't go on your phone, don't do anything.
Yeah, definitely. Such a great
Mm-hmm.
reminder, because as I was reflecting on this past year, I'm like, it's so hard for me to do, and I'm sure it's the same for a lot of people, because it's hard to sit in boredom. So I think that's a new thing we can all try, and actually decompressing is important too. I've realized sometimes jumping straight from one thing to another just leads to bad outcome. I have found.
Mm-hmm.
So taking a little bit of a break in between, and just maybe I don't know. Walk around the block or stare into nothingness for a little bit might actually help, rather than like, let me just go on Netflix and find another show straight away. Like, for me, it doesn't work anyway. So I think utilizing that empty space and that boredom would actually help to improve our well-being overall, not just to improve our creativity and find ways to be more creative, but it helps in so many different aspects. And actually, another thing that you mentioned that was interesting, speaking of that and physical health, I realized that if you're bored, maybe go for a walk. Yeah, that
Mm-hmm.
that helps, because your mind can wander, and then it's like a low engagement activity, and it kind of helps to improve your physical health and mental health. And maybe on your walk you find something to do, like you think of a new creative idea. That has happened to me a few times.
Yeah, I think walking, especially in nature, if you can do it, is a great, activity. right? I have a park nearby my house, and that's one of my favorite things to do is just walk around, you know, try not to, you know, go do something right away, but just walk around the park and decompress, let my mind wander, right? It's a great activity.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of these insights on boredom. Hopefully
Mm-hmm.
after this podcast episode, our audience will be a bit more open to being able to sit in boredom, which actually, actively do that. When they feel bored, they will sit through it and ideas will come to them, perhaps. But now let's talk about something a bit more practical because, our audience will probably still wonder, okay, I hear you. I know it's good for me, to be able to get that creativity going. But what would be a practice, something that is super simple and everyone can try, something that we haven't talked about yet, that you would recommend to our audience to be able to utilize their boredom and turn that into creativity?
Well, I think, as I was mentioning before, if you have something you're interested in pursuing, whether it's a topic or project, if it's something that requires research, then you could just research a little bit before, like maybe an hour or so, and then take 1 hour, 2 hours, and just sit there and don't do anything right away. First of all, just let your body be restless, right? Let yourself be restless, get over that discomfort. But then after a while, have a pen and paper and let your mind sort of do its thing. And don't get up to look at the phone. Don't get up and do anything. Just sit there and force yourself to sit there. So I came up with quite a bit of the ideas for both of the books by doing that. So I definitely would suggest that. Now, if it's something that's not really research related, I suggest still trying it. Still just sit there and you can just think about whatever it is that your creativity is. Maybe it's furniture making, maybe it's, something else. Just jot down ideas as they come to you and just do not give in to the restlessness. I think that's important.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to let your mind get to a state where it is becoming restless, where it is becoming uncomfortable, because that's where
Yeah.
the magic happens, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think that's one practice that everyone should try. See what comes of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, the trickiest part of this is probably how distracted we all are at all times because, we have this little devil called the phone.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty sure everyone is, guilty of, reaching for their phone when they're like, okay, I have nothing to do. I'm so restless. Let me just check what notifications I have.
Yeah.
In other cases, like you're saying, some people might check their work emails. They just have the computer open there and then they're like, okay, let me just check this quickly. And that will be really tough because before you know it, you're onto some other trains already, and you forget about the fact that, oh, I was actually sitting here with my boredom to come up with ideas. So for a lot of people, I know they have short attention span. For them to
Mm-hmm.
be able to do what you suggested, they have to be quite good at, like focusing on one thing at a time. What about those people with short attention span and they're kind of saying, I don't think I can do this, Mark. This is too hard.
Well, I would say start small. Like, don't do an hour or two, like, I'm saying here. Start with 10 minutes, start with 5 minutes, right? Also, I think what I've done at times is start at a quiet part of the day. Like, I naturally it's easier for me to sit in boredom, I'm going to say, in the morning when I'm not fully awake yet, right? So maybe finding a time when it's a bit easier, right? And knocking down the time to 5 minutes. Just build yourself up to, a little bit longer each day. Also, if you want to begin building your tolerance for boredom, if you're in a line at a bank or a line anywhere, really, don't pick up your phone, right? And I know how challenging that can be,
Yeah.
right? But just consciously doing that, taking these little parts of your day, even if it's for 1 minute, just to not engage in social media or whatever it is that's on your phone or anything that's going on. Just try to be as present as possible.
Yeah, that is so important and so hard. I can confirm. I tried that. I remember. I think I was just waiting in line to board the plane, and I was like, "What do I do now? Like, I have to listen for what they're saying. I cannot really listen to music, and at the same time, like, I have so much time on my hand. What do I do?" And then I was just, you know what? I'll just sit here. I'll just stand here, observe. I started observing the people around me, and I was like, "This is quite fun." Like just noticing fellow humans, what they're doing. And then that gave me some interesting ideas for stuff that I can try, making new contents. So can confirm this really helps. So, if our audience are still in doubt, I would highly, highly recommend that, and definitely try it if you can.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned planes, because I can't remember where I was reading it, but apparently being on long flights and just sitting there and not watching a movie and not looking out the window is one of the prime times for harnessing a lot of creativity. And I've actually experienced that myself on some flights from Vancouver to Toronto, where I've come up with some pretty good ideas and directions to go in. So yeah.
Yeah.
If you're a person out there who always flies a lot, try it there.
Yeah, definitely. That's so good to hear. And there's something about being on a long flight that is helpful. I think another part of it is probably because you don't have any internet. So you just kind of you just have to utilize the resources at hand, do whatever you have. Some people read, like I read too, but sometimes it gets boring because it's like, I don't know, like there's something about being on the plane. I'm like, I feel restless. I need to do something. That is probably that prime window of, boredom that you were mentioning. So, I'm not boarding any long flight just yet or anytime soon. But, if anyone is listening who might be waiting for the plane right now, then I think that's a good thing to try for sure. That's going
Yeah,
to be fun.
it's a forced boredom, right?
Yeah, exactly. You kind of forced to try it,
Yeah.
and it doesn't hurt. It's gonna help. And I think trying for 5 minutes, like you were saying, for people that are kind of new to this and find it hard to concentrate, would really help. And you might watch the clock. I don't know what else you might do, but I'm sure something will come of it.
That's okay. You can watch the the secondhand tick away, right?
Yeah, exactly. Something might come of that. You
Yeah,
might
exactly.
come up with a new idea for okay, well, how about it goes like this instead of like this? Who knows? Anyway, enough chit chatting about the fun stuff about planes. I think this has been a really interesting conversation for me because I'm also one of those people that struggle when I have nothing to do, or I find that this boredom will lead me nowhere. So thank you for sharing your insights and the practice, especially. I will definitely try that. Now, before we let you go, we've got open mic, and I know you've got a few things you would like to share with our audience. So take it away, Mark.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So, I mean, on the topic of well-being, I've been interested in a couple of things recently. The first one is an idea called evolutionary mismatch, and maybe some of the audience might have heard of it. It's a concept from biology, but it's the idea that for humans, it's the idea that the society we've created today is totally out of whack and out of sync with our biology. And so we are hunter gatherers, in body and mind, right? Our bodies and our psychology have been forged by thousands of years of living in the wild, and it's only recently that we've created this sort of crazy society that we live in today. And psychologically, we're like a fish out of water here, right? And so it's no wonder that so many of us are experiencing anxiety, stress, depression, sleeplessness, all sorts of health problems. And it comes down to this idea of evolutionary mismatch, that we've created a world that is not good for us, right? And so that's what my most latest book is about, The Mismatched Human. It's about how psychologically we are not meant for living in this world we've created, and all the sorts of things that we're doing wrong. And I think just realizing that we are sort of hunter-gatherers in our nature, and imagining what that hunter-gatherer would be in our world today, they would not know what to do with all this stuff, right? And yeah, it's a very interesting concept, and I think it has a lot to benefit if we start learning more and more about how we're so mismatched with the world we've created.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think especially because we were talking about all the stimulations we have in our daily lives. That's exactly it. We're not supposed to live like this, and I think it's just hard to find the balance because that again, coming right back to my word of the year, balance. I actually have been struggling with this quite a bit. I'm like I have to check my phone. Work is on there. Look at this, so many things that I have to check is on there. But I really don't want to sometimes. I just want to be able to turn off my phone and do my things without having to worry if I miss something. And I guess it's not that we're going to miss anything. It's just a conditioning because we're always, kind of wired to look out for these things nowadays. That it's kind of like if you feel threatened, if you don't have access to the internet, like, for example, about probably 2 months ago, we had a blackout in Melbourne because one of the internet providers, Optus, had a blackout for like I think about 12 hours or something like that. I woke up and I felt like we were doomed or something. Is this the end of the world? Like I had no internet. I couldn't call anyone. I couldn't access the internet. But then life was happening as usual. I went downstairs to the cafe. Everyone was functioning just fine. And I was like, okay, I just had a freak out because this is so different, but there's nothing wrong with disconnecting yourself from the world for a little bit. The world, in fact, is still going and you still have people to talk to, So that was extremely interesting. A very interesting morning, I have to tell you. I'm still processing that. And that gives me a few new ideas as well. Because, like it's fine. Turn off your phone. It's not that big of a deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think sometimes we think things are going to be a disaster or we think things are going to be great, but they're actually not, and I think, I mean, what are we fearing exactly? What are we fearing when we don't have the internet? That we're not going to see this work email. Well, okay, what if you don't see this work email? Then what's going to happen? I think if we start to unpack, well, what are these reactions actually? Then we realize, oh, that's a stupid reaction. Nothing's going to happen if I don't see this work email till tomorrow, right? But like you said, we've been conditioned. We've been conditioned to always be on edge, always be, making sure that we're secure, that we're not going to lose our job, that we're doing the best we can. Yeah. And that's part of that whole achievement striving society that we've created that is very toxic for us.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like an interesting book that you wrote there. So I guess even more interesting than the topic that we just talked about, of boredom. Hopefully we can have you back to talk about it another time because I can hear that it's directly related to our well-being.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's, I think the idea that we're hunter-gatherers and living in this world has like so many potential things that we can talk about and so many potential things that, can improve our lives if we start thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that and for coming on today. I know it's evening where you are and it's a weekend, so we appreciate your time. Before we let you go, I would love to get you to share with our audience perhaps your website or maybe social media pages where they can follow your work.
Sure. Yeah. So our website is coldnoodlecreative.com. So that's where we have our books and other things. Also on Facebook and on Instagram, it's at Cold Noodle Creative. And you can find like both of the books, Power of Boredom and The Mismatched Human. You can find them on the all 9 retailers as usual. Right. So yeah, go and check out the website, social media, and yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Lou. Name is called Cold Noodle Creative.
There's a story behind that one.
Okay. I'm curious to find out more about that story maybe next time. Thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you, Lou. My pleasure.
You have been listening to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights podcast produced by the Wellbeing Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, we.lmsl.net. where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.